I'll let my parents move in here. You can't even cook. So leave, Mark said with a smug grin, acting as though he had the upper hand. I was stunned, unable to say anything. There was no way I would let my parents live in my home and then allow him to move in with his family without my consent. Trying to kick me, the actual homeowner, out. I had been putting up with Mark's controlling behavior for a while, but this was the last straw. I couldn't keep living with him if he continued this way. I knew it was time for Mark to face some consequences. My name is Sarah, and I'm in my 40s, married to Mark. He's a stay-at-home husband, handling the housework since I have a full-time job. I'm the one who works to bring in the money we need, and ideally, all of this would lead to a stable life together. But lately, it feels like my efforts are pointless. Mark is overly controlling. It's not that I have an issue with him being a house husband or with the idea that men don't always need to work, but he behaves as though he's in charge, even though he doesn't contribute financially. Out of nowhere, Mark would say things like, "I'm so tired today. I want some ice cream, go buy it for me," while lounging around the house at 11 p.m. The convenience store wasn't far, but after a long day at work, I was exhausted and his demands only added to my frustration. "Why don't you go get it yourself? It's just a short walk to the store," I snapped, more sharply than I intended. His behavior was really starting to wear me down. When I refused, Mark just laughed and said, "That's how you're going to act? You never know what'll happen if you upset your husband." He always insisted on acting like the head of the house, expecting respect simply because he was the husband. Honestly, I was done with him acting so superior. Every time he did this, my frustration grew, and I didn't want to deal with him anymore. That night, I realized if I kept tolerating Mark's behavior, on top of my already stressful job, I wouldn't be able to handle it much longer. So, I told him, "I'm really tired. I'm going to rest in my room." But Mark didn't like that and stopped me, saying, "Wait, what's with that attitude toward your husband? I could kick you out right now if I wanted to. Do you think it's okay to upset your spouse like that?" He looked furious. Who does he think he is, acting like the boss when he doesn't even work? He can be as disrespectful as he wants, but the moment I upset him, he throws a tantrum. "I'm sorry, but I'm exhausted. Please understand," I said, trying to avoid further confrontation. Mark sighed heavily, muttering, "You're a disappointment as a wife." At that point, I couldn't muster the energy to argue, so I just apologized again and went to my room. Day after day, Mark's behavior wore me down, but I was too drained to confront him about it. That's how exhausted I was. Then, one day, I caught a terrible cold. The doctor said it was a stress-induced fever, and all I could think of was Mark. I was so sick I couldn't move, so I took a day off work, lying in bed. When I told Mark I was unwell, he snapped, "A cold? That's just an excuse. Go to work. You're useless." His words made my fever even worse. He added, "I'm not taking care of you. This is your problem. Deal with it." So I lay there, alone in my room, feverish, with no help. I was too weak to even get myself a cold compress, and I didn't want to face him again for fear of more abuse. My temperature hit 103 degrees Fahrenheit. The fever was so high that I was drenched in sweat. I couldn't even change out of my wet clothes. I thought, wouldn't it be easier to just fade away? I endured a painful night alone, consumed by those thoughts. Maybe it was the fever, but I couldn't sleep. As the night wore on, I was overwhelmed with loneliness and doubt. I desperately wished Mark would do something, even something as small as getting me an ice pack or checking in on me with a simple "Are you okay?" But that was just a fantasy. The words I actually received only tore me apart, leaving me anxious and confused. Why was I the only one suffering? What had I done wrong? Why couldn't things go right with Mark? Once these thoughts took hold, the tears wouldn't stop. It was unbearable. After a few days of rest, my fever broke and I was able to return to work. My coworkers and bosses asked if I was okay, expressing genuine concern. But I had to keep going. I needed to support the household. They seemed even more worried when I said I couldn't afford to take more time off. Their kindness was such a contrast to Mark's attitude, and it made me cry. I realized I was reaching my breaking point. A voice inside me screamed that I couldn't go on like this. I was pushing myself too hard, ignoring my feelings. This life wasn't sustainable. Sooner or later, I'd hit my limit and wouldn't be able to recover. Deep down, I knew that, but I hadn't yet found the strength to deal with it. By then, my feelings for Mark had faded completely, but I didn't have the energy to plan for separation. How could I even begin to process it all? Every day I worked hard, came home exhausted, and dealt with Mark's whims. That was my reality. One day, while I was resting in my room, Mark called out, "I need to talk to you. Come here." It had been a while since we had a serious conversation, and I dreaded what he might say. When I sat down, Mark looked unusually excited and said, "I'm going to let my parents move in. You can't even cook, so leave." I was stunned. All I could say was, "What? You need to go because you're living with my in-laws," he continued. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but he kept pushing forward, insisting that he wanted to change the ownership of the house and make it his and his parents' home. He was planning to divorce me and start fresh with them, stating that his decision was final and my opinion didn't matter. I felt overwhelmed by his selfishness, making decisions without considering me. My parents were excited when I suggested they move in with us. They missed me, and I wanted to care for them. But Mark, acting as the so-called man of the house, was only concerned about his own wants. I knew I couldn't stay with Mark any longer. My heart told me it was impossible. Mark, oblivious to my feelings, chuckled and said, "You love me so much, don't you? I know this is shocking coming from your husband, but I just want to take care of my family. Please understand." It felt like a rebuke, but I wanted to say, "That's not true at all." I had no love left for him. All I felt was disbelief at his selfish actions and regret for not leaving him sooner. Why hadn't I left him earlier? If I had, maybe he wouldn't have taken advantage of me the way he had. I even hated my past self for being too weak to walk away. Mark seemed to misunderstand, thinking I still cared and didn't want a divorce. But he was wrong. I no longer felt anything for him except disgust for his selfishness. To make it clear, I finally said, "Fine then, I'll leave." Mark was stunned. "What?" he asked, clearly not expecting me to agree so easily. He needed to realize that the old me, the one who used to take care of him, was gone for good. Whatever happens to Mark now, it's no longer my problem. I won't be there to help him because we're no longer a couple. Seeing my resolve, Mark stood there, stunned and motionless. I took that opportunity to go to my room and gather only the essentials. I couldn't manage the bigger items today, so I'd have to arrange for movers later. As I got ready to leave, Mark rushed to stop me and asked, "Are you really sure about this? If we divorce, we'll be strangers to each other." I smiled, replying, "I've already fallen out of love with you. Letting go feels like a weight has been lifted." Mark stood there, looking lost and confused. I nodded, added, "Thanks for everything," and walked out of the house. Mark looked worried, but I didn't turn back. Once I got to my parents' place and explained everything, they were angry at first but calmed down once they saw I had a plan. I started healing while staying with them, beginning to sort things out, starting with the divorce. After I sent the divorce papers, Mark texted me, "Are you sure? I don't think this is the right thing, but honestly, I don't have any feelings for you anymore. If we keep pushing this, and you say you don't want the divorce, that will be a problem. I'm just relieved you're gone. Please finish the papers quickly." I didn't get a response when I replied. A few days later, Mark sent me the signed papers with his sections filled out. I finished mine and submitted them to the county office the same day. Now, Mark and I are officially divorced, and I no longer have to carry the burden of supporting our home. During the divorce proceedings, we divided our assets. Mark got the house, as he had insisted on keeping it, so I transferred ownership to him and decided to move forward. The house had never really felt like home anyway, it was more of a burden. Instead, I filed for alimony from Mark, which his parents were helping with since he was unemployed. Mark is now looking for a job and probably plans to repay them once he finds stable work. But as we all know, plans don't always go as expected. A month passed after the divorce, and I moved out of my parents' house into a new place, finally enjoying some peace. That's when I got a call from Mark. Honestly, I didn't want to deal with him, but I knew ignoring him might complicate things further. So, reluctantly, I picked up the phone. "Hello, what do you want after all this time?" I asked, exhausted with the whole situation. I just wanted him to get straight to the point. Mark begged, "Please help me." His tone was desperate, and I couldn't help but laugh. I knew he was in trouble, but this seemed like a bad situation. All right, what's going on? Tell me everything, I said, amused but still curious. Mark began stumbling over his words. After the divorce, he stayed in the house for a month, but now a rent payment was due. Since he wasn't working, he couldn't cover it himself, so he turned to my former in-laws for help. However, the bill turned out to be $1,800, far more than they expected on their fixed pension. They couldn't afford it and were furious, telling Mark, "This isn't what we agreed to." They blamed him entirely. Lost and panicked, Mark called me in tears. "I didn't know the rent would be so high. The house is a mess now. What are you going to do about it?" I couldn't help but sigh. Mark was blaming me now. Yes, I hadn't mentioned the rent earlier, but it was his fault for taking on the house without understanding the costs. He'd shut me out, treated me poorly, and now, when things went wrong, he wanted me to help. "Please, I need you. I can't handle this alone. You still care about me, don't you? If you care about someone, you should help them out," he begged, his tone full of entitlement. I wanted to say that my feelings for him had disappeared long ago, but I held back. Instead, I replied coldly, "I don't owe you anything. You pushed me away, and now you want help when it's convenient for you? That's not fair." Mark tried to defend himself, saying, "Don't be so harsh. Whether you love me or not doesn't matter now. We were married. Can't you help me just this once?" I wasn't moved. "You left me. My feelings for you were long gone even before that. It's been a long time since I stopped loving you." When I heard Mark's voice crack, saying, "I can't believe it," something inside me snapped. For so long, I endured his selfishness, his disregard for me when I was sick, hoping things would improve, but they never did. I worked hard to build a life with him, but this was the end result. Why had I stayed so long? Why hadn't I left when I stopped loving him? Why didn't I protect myself sooner? Those regrets hit me like a wave. Mark never truly understood me, never supported me, never saw me as an equal. He had treated me like a maid and a paycheck, all while ignoring my struggles. And now, after all of his actions, he called me, pleading for help, as though he were the victim. His selfishness was repulsive. "Please, help me. I'm begging you. What about getting remarried? Let's start over. I promise I'll never push you away again," he suggested, desperate. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at his suggestion. "Are you serious? All of this is your doing. I've tried for so long to make this work, hoping you'd face the truth, and now you want me to pretend none of it ever happened? Do you expect me to go back to that miserable life? That's never going to happen." I refused to go back to that life. I became overwhelmed with emotion, tears streaming down my face, unsure if they were from anger or sadness. Mark was silent on the other end, unable to continue. I simply said goodbye and hung up. Mark didn't try to contact me again, wanting to make sure I never heard from him. I blocked his number. Later, I heard from mutual friends that Mark and his family had been evicted. He had asked my former in-laws for help again, but they refused, and they ended up angering the landlord. With no other options, they had to leave. Mark still hasn't found a stable job, and is now working part-time just to get by. As for my former in-laws, they were forced to sell their house and now live in a cramped, run-down apartment together. Meanwhile, I've been focusing on my career, and my boss even discussed a potential promotion. There's a chance I could become the first female manager at my company, and I'm receiving recognition from my colleagues and juniors. Sometimes, people ask me if I'm thinking about marriage again. Honestly, after everything I've been through, I'm not interested in dating or getting married. But life is long, and there's no need to rush. Many people are happy without getting married. What matters most to me is living a life I'm proud of and staying true to myself. I'm going to continue moving forward, at my own pace. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay stunned.